Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I'm a comic book artist, writer, creator, self-publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you would like to get 2 additional bonus live streams twice a month, extra long, like 2.5, 3-hour longs, we do deep dives into art study, we call it Art Book Study Group. If you would like to become part of our Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share artwork, give feedback, share posts about interesting things we find online, talk process, that and more. If you would like to read my comic books on a digital archive, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Just head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you'd like a free digital sketchbook, if you'd like to get work in progress and make gifts delivered right to your inbox, if you'd like to get monthly postings about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, blog posts about what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase copies of my comics, physical comics, or if you read digitally on Comixology or Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. That will forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up books like my first comic book series, Eye of the Gods. It is a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can pick up my most recent comic book series, Morning Star. It tells the story of Lucifer's fall from heaven as a Western. It's a 2-volume series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains the conclusion to the series, issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter, character sketches, thumbnails, page layouts, script excerpts, examples of how I use photo reference to put together comics, all that and more. Links for all of those are in the description for the video, unless you're watching on Twitch, in which case just go to the homepage for my channel. You can find links to Jeremy.net, and all these other links you'll be able to reach from there. Okay, and I want to give a shout out and an apology to Kingslow Fitness, longtime Patreon subscriber. And I've been butchering his username for ages and calling it Kingslow Fit. It's Kingslow Fitness. So apologies, man. Sorry, I've been butchering it for a long time. Sometimes stuff gets cut off on the screen. For whatever reason, I got it mixed up. My bad. But thank you for being a Patreon subscriber. Thank you for being a supporter. Greatly appreciated. And I see James is in chat already. Says, cool, looks exciting. Thank you, appreciate it. So I am back to the Medusa skull piece that I was working on. And just me taking, I'm still not done with the Medusa lover, where it's the 2 couples, where it's the couple facing each other. That piece is still in progress. I took this on as a palette cleanser. And what's interesting is the palette cleanser is now becoming something. You know what? I don't know if my face really, no, I'll leave it up there. I was going to just go even larger and cut my face out altogether. But I'm probably going to be a little more quiet than usual on this live stream. The reason for that is because this piece is giving me trouble. The new layer up here. So the first thing I did when I drew this piece is I started with the skull. Older line. I started with the skull, which obviously I've drawn lots of skulls plenty of times, so I've got a lot of practice with that. These came out just fine. When I moved on to the snake heads, I've drawn and erased each of these multiple times, and I'm still not super satisfied with most of them. So what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to be quieter and just sit down and do something I don't normally do, where I'm still going to check in with you guys in the chat. I see James is in there, and he says, I did a little drawing this past week and made some refinements similar to your approach. For the most part, had some good results. I am happy to hear that, James. So, I mean, I'm still going to check in with the chat and see how you guys are doing. But, my whole goal in this is that I don't want to make things look like it's easy and magical. I want to show you guys the struggles and the hard part. And right now, for me, the big challenge is I'm super happy with how the skull the big, humanoid skull looks, and I'm dissatisfied with the serpent skulls. They just don't feel like they're up to the same quality with the hatching and the description of form. So this is really more of a challenge of me drawing and using, I guess, good judgment to try and evaluate and repair. Not really repair, because this isn't me fixing a broken sketch. This is me taking an existing piece and just trying to get it to where it needs to be. But for me right now, the big thing that I'm really fighting with is just getting this thing to look right, to feel like it's of the same level of quality as the larger skull that's around it. So what I'm trying to say is I need to focus more. And that means I'm going to be quieter on this stream than I usually am. But by all means, any feedback or engagement or anything you guys want to say or ask, feel free to ask. And whenever I look up, I will chime in. So let's see here. James says, do you have any, here, let me throw that up on the screen, because that's a good ass question. He said, do you have any tips for drawing from imagination? I'm inclined to do it at times, but it doesn't always go as planned. Well, drawing from imagination does not mean that you don't use any reference. They're two different things. Some people assume that drawing from reference means you find an image and you copy that image exactly. What drawing from reference means is that it supplements your imagination. It's there to fill in the blanks where you don't quite know where things should be. Like I've got a few different snake. Zoom in on that. I've got a few different snake skull photos that I pulled when starting this series. And what I usually do is, it's a process. Drawing from imagination, what I tend to do is I tend to do a really rough thumbnail that's just a scribble. And it probably is maybe like 1/10 of whatever the idea in my imagination is. And then I'll do another scribble that's slightly more refined and slightly more refined. If it's something figurative, then I will usually grab these little figures that I have, the little gray figures, and I would just put them in the pose that I'm trying to draw and then snap a photo of them for reference and use that to help me work out what the basic volumes of what I'm drawing are, and then refine that. Although now I recently found an app called Art Pose Pro, and it's only like $10, and it's a really great app. It gives you like multiple like male and female figures. You can change hairstyles, skin tones. You can change their body type. It doesn't have people that are plus size, but it can go from like very thin to very super heroic. It'd be nice if it had a thing in it so you could do something that has the forms going outward and give you something that's a little bit more of a thicker body type. But no, for $10, what you're getting, it's a really great app. And I used to say, I really prefer drawing from reference with real life tools, meaning like the 3-dimensional figure that I showed you. But I've found recently it's much easier to do that with this app, mainly when I've been working digitally. But let me open a new file real quick, just because it's worth opening a new file just to show you. It's a very simple idea, but you can do this working traditionally if you have vellum or tracing paper. Is just the idea that in digitally, it's just working on layers. And let's say we switch to red the way I frequently do. Let's say I just wanted to do a character. I don't know. Let's say, scoot this guy over. Let's say I wanted to do Cyclops from the X-Men. I've got him. So this is a pretty rough sketch. But really, the idea of drawing from imagination is repeated refinement. That is the larger point of what I was going to get at. Is you're not going to get that first drawing when you see people who can just draw beautiful stuff out of their head and they don't need to do multiple passes or multiple sketches. That's a skill that takes training to get there. And there's no real shortcut. There are people who occasionally come into this world and have like a natural talent for it. But more often than not, most of the people who are able to do it because they've just exercised this muscle year after year after year. But what I'm getting at is you do that first pass, and it's kind of rough. Then you just drop the opacity, put another layer on. Now this one blue. And let me drop the opacity of my line art. On here, you would kind of refine it a little bit more. And put in construction lines. So it's kind of like a 3-layered process. When I draw from imagination, most of the time, if it's just something to get an idea down, they're rarely more detailed than what I did in that first drawing. Like my sketchbook is ugly as hell. Some artists do like beautiful sketchbooks that they publish. My sketchbooks are really just scribbles and notes about what I drew and why. They're like notes for whatever the thing is that I'm eventually going to be working on. I think the cheekbone on this side's out a little bit too much. Let's see here. Traveler in the chat. Good to see you, man. Haven't heard you for a while. Ugh, I'm all like loopy mouthed. Said dropping in as I get ready for work. You have to finish when I get home. All right, man. Have a good time at work. Well, not good time at work, but hope you have a good day at work. Be safe. Be well. But yeah, so for me, it's a layered phase. It's a layered process going from super scribbly to construction to final line. That's pretty much my process. So I know you mentioned, James, that oh wait, why am I even, well, I guess I have to decide where his eyes are, but I realized I'm drawing eye sockets in there. When it's Cyclops, his eyes are going to be covered. So I got to account for his visor. Like, obviously, James, you know that I'm huge on thumbnails. You've seen me go on and on. I won't shut up about thumbnails. I'm just constantly doing it and talking about that process. So let's go back just to, I'm going to keep drawing this, but to talk more about how you mentioned that a lot of times you draw from imagination that it doesn't necessarily go where you intended. That first sketch that I did there, frequently, before I moved to what I'm doing now in terms of construction, I'll do 3 to 5 of those little sketches that I just did. I mean, you see me do pages and pages, spend a whole hour just drawing little scribbles to work out what I think the drawing should be. That's usually the place where, you know, before I'm even in construction, that scribbly phase is where I put most of my effort. So when I'm doing something and I'm not sure if it's going to come out right, or I'm like, oh, this isn't working for me. Those are all the things that I'm usually doing. I try to do all those things at the scribble stage, so that when it comes to refining the drawing, it's really just a matter of using your traditional skills in terms of your sense of process, anatomy, volume, structure, proportion, all of those things that go into a good drawing. It's really just a matter of working all of those things out. So you have all of the tools to solve drawings that are that you're drawing from imagination. It's a matter of thinking of it as you're using the exact same skill set that you would use for a finished comic book page or any other type of illustration that you're working on, using those exact same problem solving skills, but applying them to something that you're just pulling out of your ass. That is my approach in terms of drawing from imagination. More than anything, I have just dozens of sketchbooks laying around that just have these super scribbly, scrappy ass marks. For me, just trying to figure out what I'm doing with a particular sketch. And the fact that I dove in so wholeheartedly into drawing something else should tell you that I'm running scared from my Medusa piece. I'm definitely, when I'm doing something and I'm having trouble with it, it's really easy to get me sidetracked, and I'm calling myself out just because that's what I have to do to keep myself on track. Being willing to be self-critical and call it when I'm chickening out. But I actually think I can finish this sketch fairly quickly. See, James says those thumbnails. He says that makes sense now. Now, but also this is a good stage. Like, I mentioned, using the tools that we normally use to assess and fix drawings. Right now, I'm looking at stuff like Cyclops. The mass of his skull, the back of it, it's too large. I need to erase down a little bit of that. There's too much of the back of his skull here, and it might even be a little too tall as well. It's not necessarily too tall, but I do need to shave it back a little bit. I need it to go, his brow is going too straight up. It needs to curve back a little bit more. So yeah, this construction phase is a good time to refine and adjust. Let's change the blast and have it going more forward as opposed to down. Actually, Maybe have it going more forward, but it's like a wider blast. Just trying to get that shape of the pecs framed on the top by the collarbone. I'm not even sure what Cyclops is wearing these days. I'm tempted to put a giant X on his chest, just because I have not checked in with what the character's costume looks like lately. The last one I've seen was that one that when they relaunched the Jonathan Hickman X-Men, where Cyclops has just a giant dome with a big X on the face. Almost like his version of Cerebro. I'm going to adjust the anatomy here, make his pecs a little bit wider so that the X line of his pecs lines up. Well, the part of his pecs that are cutting up into his deltoids lines up with the X there. Just because that makes a nice visual complement. Let's see here. I see Daichi 404 is in the chat. Is that Cyclops? Yes, indeed it is. He's doing a quick process sketch, kind of demoing how I draw when I'm making up stuff from imagination. By the way, James, there's a video in my live stream, not in my live stream, in the channel archive. If you're just, I know you got the point, but if you wanted to see more of my thoughts on this, there's a great, that's ego for me to say that it's great when it's my video. There's a video that I think is a good demonstration of the refinement of the process of going from imagination to final. And it's a video on using photo reference, and it's a video on Norman Rockwell. If you were to search my channel, there's a video called Norman Rockwell and the Art of Photo Reference. And the reason why I'm mentioning that in this case is because there's a great book called Norman Rockwell Behind the Camera. And he used a ton of photo reference throughout his career. But one of the great things that you don't see that much is his photo reference, because he's not taking photos and then slavishly copying them. What he's doing is, first off, he doesn't even take the photographs himself. He art directs a photographer. So he picks the models, hires a photographer, stages them. And then what he does is he positions them according to what he's imagining. So his imagination, as photorealistic as Norman Rockwell's work is, the imagination comes first. And one of the things that I've found in that video is that they don't show you, most of the time they'll show you his layouts and his type. They'll show you the finished painting. In some of his books, they'll show you the finished painting and some of his pencil drawings. you don't find as many examples of his rough like concept sketches. However, I have a different book, and I mentioned the book in the video because I wanted to show an example of it. There's a book called Norman Rockwell, My Life as an Illustrator. It's his autobiography. And in that, they show a couple of Saturday Evening Post illustrations, a couple of covers, and they show his thumbnails for those before he even does the photo shoot. And that's what was really astounding to me, is that his roughs for the photo shoot are not better than any other artists. I mean, I look at them and you can tell what he's going for, but they're really like not more detailed than the two drawings I did here. Like probably they don't even have as much they don't have as much construction as the sketch part that I'm doing now. They're maybe a little bit more refined than the scribble layer that I had here at the start. You know what? I just realized I don't need the snake up there while I'm doing this. Anyway, his sketches are super, super rough. And I bring that up because, why did I bring that up? Now, I brought it up because what he does is his idea, his imagination is what comes first. He's thinking of the idea he has for the cover, he's conceiving of that, and then all of the photo reference follows his idea, how he plans to execute the painting. So even though he is being a lot more faithful to the photos than I think we would want to be, it's because those photos are literally, he's positioning them so that they look like what he's imagining. It's like he's using the photo reference the way it should be used. He's using it as a drawing and compositional tool. Now, even then, he'll still deviate from the reference. He may change the lighting here, move a shoulder down, change the drapery, or maybe he'll get like, if it's somebody wearing a dress, he may have a couple of photos of different dress, just the dresses without even the model hanging somewhere, and he'll have photo reference of that all around his drawing board while he's doing his finished painting. But I think it's fascinating to see that somebody who is such an accomplished and well-regarded artist as Norman Rockwell, that when he's just working on ideas, when he's just roughing out the idea, his sketches are just as rough as anybody else's. And I bring that up to you, James, because like you said, your idea is not necessarily coming out the way that you want. If Norman Rockwell can sit there and do a bunch of different thumbnails because he doesn't quite get it the way he wants, and then once he has a thumbnail that's decent, still needs to get photo reference, if it's good enough for Rockwell, it's good enough for you. So I don't know how much you play with photo reference, but it can be a very useful tool in your arsenal, even when you're drawing from imagination. And the other thing I will say is, like, you know, I mentioned that, yeah, there are artists, like if you go to Comic Cons and you buy a commission and there's guys just sitting at their table and you're like, how are you pulling something so genius just out of your imagination? Well, a lot of that is also the practice of the fundamentals. So, I mean, that's where how often you do figure drawing or do anatomy studies. That's where things like that really pay off. Because if you have a really good sense of human anatomy, you can draw from imagination better. So I will add that it's not just the reference, and it's not just refining your idea as you go. It's definitely putting in the hours studying the fundamentals so that you can draw. Because the way I look at it, if you can draw a cube straight forward, and you can draw a cube at a 3/4 angle. That's a pretty bad cube, by the way. Bad as in horrible, not bad as in Michael Jackson bad. And you can draw a cube from below looking up at it. If you can draw these things from your imagination, then you can draw spheres and cylinders the same way, rotating and changing direction. And sometimes, if like I'm, having dinner with my wife and we're just watching TV, maybe it's not a situation where I can focus the way I would like to. But what I'll do instead is I'll just do cylinders and boxes and practice, drawing them at different angles. Because being able to do that and just conceive of things from different directions helps a ton. I see Professor Diaz is in the chat, and he says, I want to ask you something. Feel free to ask. Let's see here. Oh, James asked in terms of the video that I'm sorry, I was rambling and ranting for a while. The video for the Norman Rockwell thing. It's on my channel. I actually did the video, and it's me narrating as I flip through the book, and I talk about the things that I observed in there. So when the live stream's over, feel free to hop over and just search this channel. But if you just type in Jeremy and Norman Rockwell, that video should come up, because it's on my channel. It's a video that I made. And he says, right, I am reminded by Kevin Eastman's TMNT art book, what with all the sketches. Yeah, Kevin Eastman's one of those guys who his artwork is very rough, but it's rough in a great way. It's rough in the way that like modern day Frank Miller is rough, like 300 era Frank Miller, where it's capturing everything it needs to, and the lines, they're not polished, but that's because they say everything they need to say, even in that rough form. Let's see here. Jay King is in the chat. How you doing, man? Says in and out, looking good, brother. Does that work? All right, go keep getting that work, get that money. Let's see here. All right, I am going to switch over to something. I have been taking a class on Schoolism. Schoolism is a online educational platform run by Bobby Chu. He's a concept artist, and I've been taking a class by a guy named Nikolai Lockertsen, and he's a concept artist. And there's a process that he mentions in his one of the processes he teaches for doing concept art in terms of working from silhouette first. And I think I'm going to use that process to finalize this piece. I just want to adjust. You know what? That's better the way I had it. This isn't perfect, but at least it doesn't create any tangents. I was going to try and refine this and change the shape of this deltoid, but I realize that that's going to create some tangents that I don't really feel like dealing with. And given the fact that this is just a rough sketch, I'll just let him have like a giant deltoid, and we'll worry about tangents another day. Because tangents are always the thing that I am fighting, battling, trying to eliminate from the work. As an artist, I have a war on tangents. So let's see. So Professor Diaz asks, do I need to memorize what I draw? Well, that is kind of what we were talking about earlier in terms of working from reference. No, you don't need to memorize what you draw. I'm not going to recap everything that I said before, but I have these little figures that I use, and I will pose them, and I will copy from the pose as if I'm working from a live model. Now, when it comes to drawing from imagination, working from figure models is one of the best things for improving your imaginative drawing, because you're actually looking at someone in front of you and you're still having difficulty drawing what it is you want to draw. At least I do. So I find that to be a very helpful process. Drop the opacity down on this one. Drop a little bit more, hide the red layer. Wait, no, that I want at full opacity. In terms of drawing, having to memorize stuff, memorize anything, I don't think that that's necessary. It's helpful to have a good sense of anatomy and gesture and structure. And that will make anything that you draw from imagination better. But you don't have to have every single thing you want to draw memorized. I mean, here's a good question is, have you ever gone to a life drawing workshop or life drawing session where you worked from a model? Because I think if you've tried something like that, you see how what you really need is not necessarily an encyclopedic knowledge of anatomy, but the ability to understand the basic volumes of what you're looking at and figuring out which anatomy is going to help sell the idea of what you're drawing and which anatomy is going to fight with it. Because believe it or not all anatomy is good anatomy. Sometimes you'll look at the figure and there'll be a muscle that in real life, the muscle is bulging in a certain direction. But when you look at it, you're like, if I put that in the drawing, it's going to make the drawing look wonky. And it takes a long time. And when I say a long time, I mean, I've been drawing for decades and I haven't mastered this skill yet. But it takes a long time to look at a human form, to be drawing it, and to be able to confidently say, all right, I'm going to put this in, but leave this part out, because if I put in this other part, it's going to confuse the viewer's eye. It's not that the anatomy doesn't exist. It's just it's not clear enough, or it fights with what you're trying to convince the illusion of a three-dimensional object you're trying to put down on paper or put down on digital. So I'm not sure, Professor Diaz, if that completely answers your question, or if you have like based on that, if you're like, well, what about this? Then feel free to ask if there's more. But I hope that answers the question that you're trying to get at. So I'm trying a slightly different technique here, which, yes, I do use holding lines when I draw figures, which is a silhouette to kind of describe the whole thing. But what I haven't really done before is, whoops, all right, some openings here. What I have not really done see here. Does that need to be? Oh, I see what happened. The line that I was drawing. See, now I need to undo. I might as well just delete this whole silhouette, because the whole time I was doing it, I was drawing it with the brush on low opacity. And I needed to be at 100% opacity for this to work. So I'll tell you what is going to end up happening here when I'm done with this is that I'm going to switch to a clipping mask, which is a layer. You can do this in Photoshop, Procreate, Clip Studio Paint. All of them are capable of doing clipping masks. It uses the layer beneath the one you're currently drawing on as a mask. So nothing that I draw will be outside of the outside of the silhouette that I'm drawing. I'm going to put a belt on him. He needs a belt. So this is pretty rough and loose the way I did it here, but let's see. All right, I gotta seal that in. Oh, I see what's wrong. So little, see, something as little as this little break right here is the reason why it keeps letting color go through. It's kind of a pain in the ass sometimes doing the color drop. All right. So now I take this layer. Let's add a new one, make it a clipping mask. Now I'm gonna go back to the lower layer and I'm gonna fill it with a darker color to really try and get that sense of like lasting light. Let's go dark. That might be too dark. There we go. Now let's go with some light. Actually, you know what? Let's do the opposite. Let's go light and I'll paint in shadows. Because I can, just because it's technically, it makes it easier to see what I'm doing. So let's see here. Professor Diaz says, I just bought an iPad Pro, but I feel weird drawing on it. Some advice, please. All right. Let's see here. Well, I will tell you that when I got an iPad Pro, I watched a bunch of videos. And I know you're asking me for advice, but the advice I have is that there are people who have videos just on learning how to draw on the iPad. There's a guy named Mike Henry. His YouTube channel is really great. I learned a lot of basic drawing fundamentals for drawing in Procreate on there. Believe it or not, I was watching a video on how to color on the iPad, and there is a comic creator, a full-time colorist named K. Michael Russell, who has an excellent channel. I learned a ton from watching his YouTube videos. But in terms of advice directly from me, there's a couple of things. One is simply spending a lot of time doodling on the iPad, because it does take a while to get used to drawing on this particular tool in comparison if you've just been drawing traditionally all your life. It takes a while to get used to it. And I look at this kind of the same way I look at inking. It took me years and years to become confident at inking, particularly inking with a brush. But one of the things that helped me the most with the process was that I spent a lot of time, like I to this day, when I do my thumbnails, I've only recently switched to doing thumbnails digitally. It used to be for a long time I would do my thumbnails with a brush. And that might sound a little bit weird, but what it would do is when the time came to actually ink a page, I'd spent a lot of time just developing my brush control. And if you're learning to draw, here's those tangents again. If you're learning to draw digitally, you kind of have to develop the digital equivalent of brush control, just developing that sense of how to get the device to do what it is you want it to do. And a lot of that comes from just not necessarily trying to do a nice or pretty or beautiful drawing, just doodling, just sketching and doing it like so much all the time. That's one of the things I think will help a lot. Another thing that will help, I have a little black glove that has 3 fingers cut out, or 2 fingers in your thumb, and this allows me to rest my hand on the tablet without creating marks or like triggering some of the gesture controls. And it depends on what app you're using, depends on your device. This may not necessarily even affect you. But I know for me, I found that as I spent more time using the iPad, I would really it would make a big difference for me personally. If I'm, the difference between when I'm using it versus not using it, it's not unusable without a tablet, but it makes a big difference for me. Let's see here. Amar is in the chat. Let's see here. I think Amar is talking about Mike Henry, and he says he has a Discord channel as well as streams on Twitch. And he says iPad feels like a toy to me. He says I prefer the desktop. The device is too small for me to do any work on. He says 13 inches is too small for for my old eyes that are worn out from CRT monitors. He says, so are we doing superhero sketches or posters? Well, this whole sketch here was in response to a question James asked at the beginning about drawing for imagination. And because I'm a coward and I'm having a hard time with the piece that I'm working on, I decided that I would indulge in doing a whole sketch just to answer James's question, which I've already answered, but I'm still finishing this sketch. But it's just that process of moving from rough thumbnails to a refined drawing. Oops, that is too big. So I'm just sort of walking through, like going from a super scribbly gesture to a to a more refined sketch. Let's see here. So yeah, it's a little bit different because I don't usually do superhero stuff, even though I love superheroes. I'm usually much more concerned about drawing my own stuff. And I don't even know why I settled on a Cyclops. I could have drawn Wolverine. I mean, Wolverine's my favorite X-Men, but Cyclops is just what popped into my head. So let's see here. But yeah, drawing on the iPad's not for everybody. Drawing on any particular device may not necessarily be the go-to. Everyone's got to work with what suits their eyes, their physical ergonomics. Everyone's going to have a different way or approach that works for them. I'm trying to figure out why the color drop keeps going all the way through the figure instead of just stopping there like I wanted it to. But anyway, this approach, normally I would come in here and I would do line art. But instead, this more value and shape silhouette approach is much more of just finding the regions of shadow and light and filling those in. And I'll tell you, I'm looking at this, and originally I kind of wanted to do like a mid-tone, add in a third value of light instead of making the top of the hands in shadow. But given how strong of a light source Cyclops optic blasts are, and the fact that, again, it's just a rough sketch from imagination, I think I'll just let this be. Let's see here. Oh, talking about the Discord channel and the Twitch. Amar was talking about Kurt Michael Russell. Yeah, his stuff. He has a tremendous. It's not necessarily about learning how to draw digitally. He's a colorist, but he explains so much about how to use the device and working digitally. But I think anyone who's getting, whether you're doing comics or just illustration in general, his channel is extremely helpful. That's my point. It's definitely check him out. So yeah, Amar has checked him out as well. And Amar also says, I've been drawing from imagination for eons. As far as I remember, other characters from other IPs from memory. And that is not something I don't have. He says, I don't have the visual catalog in memory you have from comics. He says, all my stuff is original characters. Well, part of this is just I read a lot of comics when I was a kid, so I'm just pulling on my childhood. Really, I can't tell you what costume era this is. If anything, it's probably closest to Cyclops's his costume, not in the X-Men, but there was a comic book called X Factor, and it is X Factor itself has gone through a lot of different stages, but in the original version, it was the five original X-Men: Cyclops, Iceman, Jean Grey, the Beast, and Angel coming back together to form a new team. And they try a different approach because humanity has been always fears mutants. So their approach is that they're sort of like mutant hunters, but secretly they're actually finding mutants, bringing them in and training them with the hopes that they can turn around public opinion on mutants. But that whole thing ends up backfiring because all it does is fan the flames of mutant hatred. So it doesn't quite work the way they hoped. And there's like a whole line where it comes out, like there's a whole storyline where it comes out publicly that they are not the mutant hunters, but they are mutants. They themselves are mutants, and it was one of my favorite books. Written by Louise Simonson, drawn by Walt Simonson. Well, the art, it's been drawn by a lot of people. I mean, Wolf Portasio had a great run on it. Originally started off, it was Butch Geist was the main artist. Now we're getting into what Amar was saying, my encyclopedic knowledge of comics. I've got an encyclopedic knowledge of my childhood. That is true. You got me there. I think I'm going to put a little bit of muscle back in here. Just a little dip of muscle. Just a little triangle. And even that's too big. All right. I put in too much there. I will look back up at the comments in a second, but my eye-hand coordination requires me to actually make some conscious choices here as opposed to just letting my hands sort of doodle. See. I gotta tell you, I actually really like this process because this feels more painterly. This whole thing of just working inside of the silhouette. I mean, the class that I took, the Nico Lockertsen class, has already opened up my process a lot. And it opened it up in a sense that there were some things that I was like, I don't know if I really like working that way. And then once giving it a fair shake and trying it out, it really has like I'm glad that I was open enough to try some new approaches and try some stuff that's different, even though I've been drawing for years. I think that it's what helps me continue to grow and learn is taking different classes like I do. Because yeah, I would never have come up with this approach on my own. And I suppose I could come in here and draw more or put more line art on this. Instead, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I can just clean up these edges a little bit. See what's going on in the chat. Let's see here. Amar popping out with some Let It Be. Let's see here. NMN says, neat. That from reference or without? It is without reference, which was the entire point of the live stream. I'm glad you asked. We had a whole conversation about drawing from imagination versus having a carefully planned out drawing. And I guess I wanted to show an example of, no, it's not 100% from imagination because I'm drawing someone else's character who I've seen hundreds of times. So it's not like I had to make up the costume for imagination. And James, that's another good point. Drawing for imagination when I'm making up everything is not the same as drawing an existing character from imagination. Because in a sense, there is still reference. It's just not reference in the way of taking photo reference, but there's still reference in the sense that someone designed this character and I know this character's look and feel, and I'm very familiar with it. So I'm just, letting that guide my hand as opposed to having to make up or invent a character. And I will say, trying to invent a character from your head, that is not only harder, but it really is a whole, oh, wow. All right, let me go back to this layer. That is a whole process unto itself. I mean, that's the process of character design. So let's see here. I'm going to put in one more layer. You know what? Let me undo that. I'm going to do this layer underneath. So it'll be another clipping layer. And I'm going to go slightly darker. Let's see how this looks. All right, I guess I need to go darker than that. There you go. So I want this layer to be underneath. Okay, I see what I did. I accidentally drew some of these detailed lines on the lower, on the base figure. That's okay. I can draw that back in later. Point is I'm just emphasizing the X on Cyclops because the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put kind of an overall shading on the figure to give him a little bit of light around his face and shadow on the lower part of his body. And then I'm going to call this a piece, call it done. Let's see here. Amar asks if I checked out the Black Sands podcast. They have a podcast Amar forwarded to me, and it's about marketing and being an entrepreneur on your own, building your own comic empire. And no, Amar, I haven't had a chance. I have the first episode downloaded to my phone. I just haven't had time to start listening to it yet. But it's in my queue, so to speak. So I'm definitely going to check it out. How have you liked it so far? Let's see here. Amar says they've done, they're short, like 3 minutes long. He's done 3 so far. See, NMN says, without ref, that is boss. Thank you. I appreciate that. One of the things I mentioned earlier is that when you're, one of the things that helps, even if you're drawing from imagination, is if you've got that background of doing figure drawing. If you've studied the human figure enough that you can draw it from different poses, yes, it's the X on the chest and the visor that helps sell this as Cyclops. But there's a whole learning curve to being able to draw the human figure from imagination. And I think that if anything, I'm trading more on that ability than it is just, oh, I know how to draw Cyclops real well. I was able to put on the details that tell you that it's Cyclops. But this is more about having basic figure drawing skills. Well, I shouldn't say basic, because it's not basic. It takes a long time to learn how to draw from the figure convincingly. Getting a little bit sloppy here. Yeah, I'm not going to go back in and redo it, but this is actually probably what I should have done with the top of the hands, is to draw them in with this tone that's slightly lighter than my shadow. The whole upper surface of his hand, any surface that's not facing forward, should probably have been in this tone to make it pop. Let's see here. Back to the Black Sands podcast. Let's see. He says, Amar says, it's cool. It seems like he's giving gems, but not as detailed as I would like. He made a promise that if you follow his process, he will assure you that your publishing business will be making 100K in 3 years. Well, all right, man. Start the timer. Hopefully, you can start putting into action his tips right away. I do plan to give it a listen, but I've been very deep in sort of like art education over the past few months. So I've been spending more time doing that versus the business side. In fact, you know what? This thing that I'm doing right now, this whole process of drawing in the figure with shadows instead of line, I think I may do this for the rest of the Medusa piece that I've been struggling with, because this feels like it's helping me kind of shape and sculpt the figure. Yeah, maybe I should just do this all the way across, since he does have this thing across his brow. Now this is where things are going to get interesting, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a very simple, just rounding, like to give it a little bit more volume, a little bit of light and shadow over the whole figure. A little bit of airbrushed light and shadow. Oh, this is something, you want to see something crazy? This is a little thing that I learned from that podcast. I mean, not from that podcast, from that YouTube series, the Nico Lockertsen thing. Is just throwing a rim light on the back of this makes everything pop. So I'm going to move this to the very top. And I'm going to switch to a brighter light, like just below white. This is another thing that I probably would not have done on my own. Let's see here. Amar mentioned on the Black Sands. He said that I sent him a message and said what he has done in 5 years is epic, especially when I have known comic book artists that have been making comics for decades and still have not made 100,000 or be able to make a livable wage with their comics. They said, yeah, he's not a comic book artist nor a hardcore comic book fan. He's about making stories about certain parts of Africa, also making stories that sell. He said on Monday he will talk about the process of creating stories that sell. Awesome. Well, I know from the interview that I listened to with him, his main thing was just find what people want and give it to them. Which, I mean, that's an old business adage, but he excels at it. For the rest of you guys, we're talking about Martin Godoy, the CEO and founder of Black Sands Publishing. So they're an indie comics publisher who they were on Shark Tank. So he's building out like an animation / comics / video game empire, and they've had a bunch of really successful Kickstarters. And now he's got a podcast. So if you're looking for the business side of indie comics, he is a great resource to check out. And Amar hit me to the fact that he's got a podcast now, because I had just heard interviews with him and I found them really enlightening, but it's a whole new level there. I don't like the way those lines there came out. They just felt like they were just a little too chunky. I'm curious if I turn off the blue sketch. Yeah, you can still see a little bit of. That was the thing that I was worried about. Is this this extra layer that I'm putting on there just blending in with the white that's on the background? Because the background of the entire file is white. But you can see here, there's a slight difference in terms of this rim lighting. That sketch back on just so I can see where I'm fitting in terms of his face. Actually, this is the place to use white. For pure energy. That's another thing that I am starting to learn with my art, is to be really judicious with my use of white, which when you're working mostly in black and white, like traditionally inking, you're using white constantly. So it's definitely a change in my mindset. Oop, don't want to do that there. There we go. Now it's going to do it again. I will tell you that I'm not happy with these optic blasts. Were this something that I was really like doing as a finished piece, I would redesign those blasts so that they worked a little bit better. But what was the last thing I was going to do? Because we're just about done here. We're at 17 hour 17. So I'm going to wrap this up with a little bit of light shading and toning. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create one more clipping mask layer. And see, I'm going to put this one on black. Go to the airbrush. Actually, I should put this one below the rim lighting, because that's going to kind of throw it off a little bit. Get the brush size down, the opacity low. And all I'm doing is just adding some slight rounding around the outer edges of the form to kind of give it some volume. By making it darker around the edges, what this does is it makes it feel mentally like the volumes are turning away from the viewer's eye. Like those rendered spheres. Like you see those people doing rendered sphere exercises. That's all I'm kind of doing here. Is I'm just rounding the sphere of the rib cage, rounding the sphere of the skull. Giving a little bit of rounding to the shoulder. I'm trying to leave enough room in there so I can come back in and add a little bit of highlight just around his chest and the top of his head. Let's see here. See here. Amar says, using silhouettes in negative space. He says, looked like his right arm would be going forward to balance him out, right? Well, I was thinking more that his right arm would be going behind him since he's leaning forward. So it would be balancing him out in the sense that because if his arm is going forward and he's leaning forward, that's going to make him kind of fall forward. So that's why I have his other arm kind of behind him and out of the way. But I think you could make an argument for having, let me see, let me throw another layer on top. I don't think it would be unreasonable to have one where you've got the arm, I'm still on airbrush, but having the arm over here, I don't think that that's unreasonable. You could totally do that. In fact, just sketching that in there, I'll tell you, I'm not going to redo it now for this piece, But that's actually a really good suggestion, and it probably looks better with the arm out to the right, kind of going into space that way. So good suggestion. Excellent suggestion. See, no matter how many years you make art, you can always see where there's a place just in terms of the fundamentals of composition or gesture or figure pose. There's always ways that you can improve, and it's good to have other eyes on your work to give you feedback. All right, I don't want to get too caught up in this because we're just about done here. All I'm going to do is throw another layer on top. You know what? That did not. I just want to soften that. Stands out a little bit too much on his face there. All right, one more layer with a little bit of light now. Turn off the sketch. Grab that, airbrush. And then this is, again, like the way you see people when doing those rendered spheres, adding the light part of the sphere. And all I'm doing is just doing a little bit in the center of the head. Actually, maybe I can make this go a little bit wider just because there's like light coming from his eyes. I'm going to come in there with that white. I'm going to put a little bit of stripe of white across the. Let me undo some of that. A little bit right across the visor, and then a little bit of light on the upper part of his chest, and this just helps sell that rounding of the rib cage again. Come in with the eraser, and I'm going to pull a little bit out right here in the middle for his pecs. A lot of times I'll draw in stuff and then kind of carve around it with the eraser. Now, somewhere in here, there should be a line, kind of the underside of the pecs to give like a more hard defining shadow. This layer is the shadow layer. This layer. You come back in with a darker brush. That might be too dark. Just enough to give a sense of the pecs. see here. Yeah, Amar says in terms of the pose, he says, I get it because I thought his left leg would be forward and his right leg is back. So even though he's leaning forward, it could be a counterbalance. He said, "Don't let me interrupt you doing your thing." No, I think that if you had made that comment when I was first drawing out the silhouette or the rough sketch, I totally would have put the arm where you suggested. I think it actually makes the piece stronger. Let's see here. Frank's in the chat. Salazar Art Nation says so many live streams. He says, Cyclops, cool. Keep the Greek mythology theme going. I actually started in the very beginning of the stream. You can see I was working on the Greek myth, still working on another Gorgon piece. But this was just we got into an interesting conversation with James about drawing from imagination. So I thought it would be a good time to show an example of how I approach drawing from imagination. And in the earlier part of the stream, you can hear all of my rantings and ravings. I'm not going to go back and repeat all of that. I think I want to erase a little bit more of that white that I threw on there. I'm going to go back up to this light layer with the white. And I am just going to put a stream of light. Cyclops' visor there. Looking at this, I wonder, I'm going to go in real quick and I'm just going to try an experiment, and if it doesn't work, c'est la vie. I'm trying to find the layer where I drew Cyclops' face. And I want to see what happens if I go into this layer. And if I erase everything that's outside of the blast, I go to a hard brush. Let's see what happens if I erase all of that. I just want to see if it feels like the blast is coming across his face. It kind of does, but let me try doing this on a low opacity. So let's say I take off like 60 to 70%. So it's going to wipe out a lot of it, but not all of it. I just want to see if I can give it a little bit more of a sense of the blast actually coming across his face, because the way I drew it before, it kind of felt like his face was almost sitting on top of the blast. And to be honest, that's what's problematic with drawing that energy blast they even put in there, is that even though I like it, it does feel like it's negating the sense of that blast, the actual visual of the blast coming over his face. Well, it's not perfect, but be here all day monkeying with this thing. Just come back down to my shadow layer, and I'm just gonna cut out a little bit into the shadow so that you get a separation between his jaw and his neck. Like that. All right, I think we're done with that, guys. Let me see if there's any last comments in the chat here. Let's see here. Amar says, I found the Clip Studio Paint has a pseudo endless canvas for the animation setup called Overflow Frame. He says it allows you to draw an entire extended scene out of the initial camera space. Let's see. Amar says, I need to work in grayscale more. It's really helpful when you're adding color. I mean, I am of the school that if you can get your values to look good, you can add almost any color you want and it works. I mean, hell, if I wanted to just over this entire piece, Cyclops' blasts are red. If I wanted to just go, whoa, multiply, it's like boom. There we go. Cover image. Actually, there were a couple in here as I was scrolling through to multiply. Color burn. That looks kind of hot. I actually like this. Yeah, point being is that values are super strong, super powerful. These other ones are just lighting it. The color dodge looks kind of cool. And by the way, just so you know, I don't have all these different layer settings memorized. Anytime I'm doing effects where I'm like setting the layer opacity, like not the level of opacity, but when I'm changing the layer settings, I just scroll through till I find something that looks like what I want. Or sometimes I come across something that's surprising and I'm like, oh, that is so much cooler than I would have imagined. But like most people, I just go through and I scroll through, other than overlay. Overlay is usually one of my first go-tos. But that's just when I'm painting on top. When I'm painting on top of grayscale, overlay is one of my first go-tos, overlay or multiply. But for the rest of these, it's just running through. Like this is kind of cool because you get the contrast of the warm and the cool. So the darker it is, it looks like it's moving more towards red, and the warmer it is, the more it's moving towards blue. The lighter it is, the more it's moving towards cool colors. The darker it is, it's moving towards warm colors. I think that's an interesting look. Vibe, hue, saturation, color, luminosity. So yeah. All right, guys. So that's me doing a piece of fan art from my imagination. 90-minute drawing, maybe a little bit less than that because I started by working on the Gorgon piece before we dove in. I don't know if James is still with us, but hopefully this was interesting just to see how I go through developing a drawing. And again, a shout out to Nikolai Lockertsen for introducing me to that process of painting with clipping masks within a silhouette. That is really super helpful, and I think it's taught me a lot. It's really going to advance my my artistic growth in terms of color and digital painting. Let's see here. Yeah, Amar says the stronger the pieces in black and white means that once you add the same level of tones to your final color, it'll make it really strong. Byron says easy thumbnail. Yeah, Omar said the same thing I did. Overlay should work as well. He said the blending modes come straight from photography when you're developing film. So, all right, guys. Looks like we are done for today, and we will come back to the Medusa piece, both of the Medusa pieces. So now I've got two Medusa pieces in progress that I have got to muddle my way through to a conclusion. But for now, thank you everyone for hanging out. As always, if you enjoy these live streams and you would like to get 2 additional bonus live streams per month, they are extra long, 2.5, sometimes 3-hour sessions. It's called Art Book Study Group. We do that on Patreon. And we also have a Discord channel where we have a voice channel open, so you guys can just get on the channel and talk with your mouths instead of in the chat. You can talk with me as we're doing the live stream. That's all at patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. As little as $2 a month, you get that. You get access to read all my comic books online. You get access to the Discord server where we share feedback, things that we found online educationally. Just talk about creative process. All that at patreon.com/Jeremy. Links in the description to the video. You can also, if you would like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you would like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, so if you read digitally on Comixology or Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, a standalone psychological thriller called Eye of the Gods. It's about a man who is cursed with visions he cannot control. You can pick up my most recent comic book, Morning Star. Tells the story of Lucifer's fall from heaven as a Western. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains the conclusion, issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter, character sketches, character designs, thumbnails, page layouts, script excerpts, all that and more at amazon.jeremy.net. And for those books, there are flip-throughs on the YouTube channel. If you go there and just look at book flip-through, there's flip-throughs for each of those where I just put the camera above the book and flip through so you can take a look, see what's inside, check it out. So head on over. If you haven't read my books before, at least check out the flip-through video. See if it's something that's interesting to you. All right, everybody, thank you for watching. I don't say it enough. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed. Hit that share button if you think there's somebody else you would like to who would enjoy these live streams. Please share it. Help spread the word. Help the channel grow. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. That's it for now. Go be creative.